Now we've got the Democratic nominee for Arizona's Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Just to give some indication to people listening as to who you're running against, could you talk a bit about who Mark Finchem is, your Republican opponent for Arizona Secretary of State?
Yeah, I think the important things to know about Arizona is first, the context is we are a state that has used mail-in balloting for a very, very long time, and well over 85-90% of our folks vote by mail. He wants to kill ballot by mail. He wants to make everybody vote just at their polling place on election day only, instead of having vote centers where you can vote everywhere in the state. He wants to make sure that we do a hand counting the first time around, eliminating all of the technology that we use that's much more efficient and much more accurate than hand counting. He literally has no idea how to run elections, but it goes further than that. He is an oath keeper. He is a white nationalist. He is a January 6th attendee at the riot, the insurrection in Washington, D.C. And he's an all-around not so great guy. And so, there's a lot of specific stuff and there's a lot of big stuff, but we've got to make sure to beat him in November.
Yeah, I mean, can you talk for a moment about what it means more broadly that we have a member of a far-right extremist group running for not just any position, because I think there's no doubt now about the extent to which this specific position, the Secretary of State position, is so important.
Well, it couldn't be more stark of a difference between he and I, particularly here in Arizona. Let's not forget, I was the Maricopa County recorder who built the system that beat the cyber ninjas. He was in the Arizona legislature that brought the cyber ninjas and the Stop the Steal movement onto the scene. I mean, this is really the A versus B, if ever there was one. And it's very problematic because his entire motive is based in a lie. And everything that he wants to do is to subvert American democracy through sort of just the destruction of our election systems, which work very nicely, by the way. And so you couldn't find a bigger difference between two candidates. And the Arizona Secretary of State's office is really ground zero for the battle between authoritarianism and democracy advocates who support this republic. This is the race nationally that really, I think, exemplifies the battle that this whole country is facing right now.
What's your platform? Why are you running this race?
Well, like I said, I was the Maricopa County recorder who built the system that beat the cyber ninjas. I am a CIRA certified election administrator. That's a certification that comes out of Auburn University in the Election Center. I'm an attorney. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I'm a dad. And I've actually run elections. I've actually made sure that folks can vote. And I was even the chief deputy recorder in Pima County down in the Tucson area as well. So I know what Arizona's election systems need from a chief election officer in the Secretary of State's office. On the other hand, we've got someone who, just wants to make chaos. He's like the Joker. He just wants to watch it burn down. And nobody really knows what the rationale or the reasoning is, because there isn't anything based in reality that he's advocating for. So I'm running for Secretary of State to protect the republic, to protect our democracy, and to make sure that my three daughters have a future that they can rely on.
What would Arizona's 2024 election look like if Finchem were to win this election?
Well, if he were to win this election, he's already talked about not certifying an election that Donald Trump did not win. And that's just kind of it, right? There's nothing more to it. It is one of his proposals was that the Arizona legislature would determine whether or not the election was fair. In other words, in Arizona, if he's the Secretary of State, your vote won't matter. It'll be somebody else that decides the outcome of the elections, not yours. That's not how this country is supposed to work. So for 2024 and Arizona's 11 electoral college votes, we are a swing state. We are a state that could really go either way. We've got to have integrity in our systems. And if somebody is that willing to talk out loud about putting his thumb on the scales, he's unfit for this office, and we've got to keep him out of it.
Now, as it stands, how could a Republican weaponize the Secretary of State's office in Arizona?
Well, there's a whole host of things that can be done behind the scenes. For example, the Elections Procedures Manual is promulgated out of the Secretary of State's office. That's the rule book where the 15 counties run their elections from. The Secretary of State has the bully pulpit as the chief election officer and could cause chaos and doubt the way he has done from the state legislature, but it would even be more pronounced because this is the one person who actually makes sure that all of our elections go well. The dangers are multifold. insofar as influencing legislation and seeing to it that certain people, certain systems don't get certified. And if the secretary doesn't certify our election systems the way he's indicated that he might not, we could end up with no election systems. And then what happens? Because the secretary actually does what's called logic and accuracy tests on the actual equipment. And so if he becomes Secretary of State and he just decides willy-nilly not to certify perfectly good systems, we won't have elections in Arizona. And then what? It's absolute chaos that he presents, and we have to stop him.
So are there any guardrails to prevent Republicans from refusing to certify an election just because he doesn't personally like the outcome?
Yeah, we're the guardrails. The voters are the guardrails. We've discovered over the last couple of years the fragility of democracy itself and the capacity that a few people in the right positions of power, the possibility that they have, if they all decide together to act poorly, we could have serious issues. The guardrail is the election in November to make sure that Republicans and Democrats and independents elect a Secretary of State here in Arizona who not only has faith in the Americans who run elections, but believes in American democracy in the first place. We cannot depend on the courts. We cannot depend on the legislature. We can only depend on the American public. That's where we're at, unfortunately. And that's why we got to turn out every single voter of every political stripe for reasonableness and for consistency and predictability in our election systems.
Are you heartened by the attention that your race and Secretary of State races more broadly are getting, or do you feel like they're still not getting their due attention given the threats that we're facing right now?
Well, look, I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy. I'd rather that folks just kind of move along when it comes to these races, but unfortunately, the fragility of our democracy is exposed through these kinds of races. And the fact that it is so critical that we keep people like Mark Finchem out of these offices brings an appropriate attention to it. It's something that folks have to pay attention to, and particularly here in Arizona. I mean, also Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, the governor's race in Pennsylvania, nationwide, there's a whole bunch of important races. But this is the one symbolic race, I think, that stands above them all because of who Mark Finchem is, what he represents, who I am and what I represent, and the stark difference there. So the attention is welcome because it's a critical moment. I just wish it wasn't the critical moment that it is. So it's sort of a mixed bag when it comes to whether or not we ought to have the attention that we have.
Okay, so what would your message to pro-democracy Republicans and independents out there who may never have cast a ballot for Democrats be?
Well, look, as far as my race is concerned, it's very easy. In 2020, I administered the election that brought about my own electoral loss. And I called the balls and strikes just like they should have. And when I wasn't successful, I passed the torch to the next guy. This is the kind of integrity and honor that I represent in this office. And I will tell you this, there are several Democrats running for these offices around the country who I believe would do the exact same thing, because our democracy in this country is more important than our personal political ambitions. Our democracy and preserving the republic that is served by that democracy is far better served by people who'd be good losers and good winners and make sure that we get the elections that we deserve. That's what's critical. So folks of all political stripes can believe, particularly in this candidate, that you've got someone who's just going to do the job regardless of what the political outcome is at the end.
Let's finish off with this. Do you have any stories from the campaign trail that were especially memorable for you, or that kind of highlight like why this race is so important?
Well, I will say I was in Kayenta up on the Navajo Nation on the first day of early voting, 27 days before Election Day here in Arizona. And I talked to a woman who lost her son. He was a Marine Corps veteran like me, but she lost him to PTSD and some of the surrounding circumstances because they didn't have the services in her community that she needed. The elections have consequences that go far beyond potholes and water reservoirs and other sorts of things. Elections can have personal consequences for families, just like yours and everybody else's. We need to pay more attention to the folks that we're putting into office, not just because of the flash in the pan logos, but because it matters to families across the country, and particularly families who've sacrificed unnecessarily to make sure that we have the freedoms that we have. These are critical. And for me, it's about family. And the American family needs to support itself with reasonable politicians, reasonable candidates who are just going to get the job done.
Adrian, how can we help your campaign?
Well, we are in the battle for our democracy, and folks say that this is the most important election of our lifetimes. Unfortunately, this could be the last election of our lifetimes, given the South Carolina case that's going before the Supreme Court soon. And so supporting candidates like myself and like some of the others that I mentioned is critical. You can go to electfontes.com, that's electfontes.com, and contribute financially. You can also sign up to volunteer. We've got phone banks, text banks, postcards, help. If you're in Arizona, door knocking is always a good way to go. And we're cooperating with a lot of folks across the United States of America. In fact, one of my volunteer coordinators is in Pennsylvania. She just moved out of state, but she's sticking with us. Any little bit helps, but the financial contributions really will help us get the message out and will help us support those volunteers out in the field.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate for anyone watching or listening, do not sleep on this race. These Secretary of State races may not get the attention that the gubernatorial races, the Senate races, or even the House races are getting, but this is all the marbles basically. So Adrian, good luck on the campaign trail. We'll do anything we can to help on our end, and thanks so much for taking the time.
Appreciate it, Brian, and I'm glad to be the first one on this fancy new set of yours. It's really cool. I like it.